What's up? How are you guys doing?
Doing great. Had a
Not too
fantastic.
bad.
Awesome.
Excited.
What's that one?
Excited. It's
Excited.
super freaking awesome for the four of us to be chatting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it is. I
such a
think
great
we,
conference.
Oh man.
yeah, we may or may not have all seen each other at Day to Day Texas, but that's what we're going to be talking about today. Sort of the
Yes.
recap of Day to Day Texas. I guess one, since you're the probably the longest standing attendee and speaker at Day to Day Texas, would you mind describing for the audience who doesn't know what Day to Day Texas is, what Day to Day Texas is?
So Day to Day Texas is it's really a community conference organized by Lynn Bender. Has been doing it for a long, long time. I mean, I've known Lynn since like 2008, and I know he's been doing a lot of events and kind of bringing the community together. There's no he's just been able to kind of bring a bunch of really cool people for so many times, for many years, for decades now, and it's just. I think it's like almost an essence of like an honest, no BS type of conference. Like it's not a vendor thing. You're not nobody's vendors pushing. And if there are vendors speaking, hey, I'm a representative vendor. Like everybody's very clear about what they're presenting and stuff. And I think it's always it's such a community thing. And I like how he says it's really a party that it is a conference. Uh, so for the folks, like I know folks who really want to have like just dive into the real stuff and don't have to go kind of go through all the fluff of vendors and stuff like that. Just, this is the conference to go to, and it's great that you start the year with it. That's what I love, and something that I always go when I talk. I make sure that the talk I'm presenting there is the first talk I'm giving in the year.
That's really cool. I will vouch for that. I think that there's at least stateside not really any conferences like it, independent, no vendor shilling. So there's other conferences like I'll just call people vendors out, not to pick on them, but just to give examples like reInvent's AWS conference, and everything there is about AWS. And you go to Snowflake, everything there is about Snowflake, and that's just kind of how it is. It's not right or wrong. It just different strokes for different folks. Day to Day Texas, I think, is a good collection of industry leaders and practitioners who just want to network with each other, have a good time, listen to some great talks, and become morbidly obese on barbecue over the weekend. And it's great. So yeah, that was my Sunday. And Girl Scout cookies.
I want to throw this out, throw something to Tony. So I was chatting with Tony a couple weeks ago, and I
That's
was like,
right.
"Hey, there's this Day to Day Texas. You should come." And I don't think Tony, you had any idea about it. So you're this is tell me. I'm curious your perspective.
Yeah, well, put it this way, it's like I've not been to one of these what I would call grassroots conferences since probably before the pandemic. I mean, I used to go to a bunch of them. I was a big veteran of Strata in its glory years. And so in the more recent past, I've been at these vendor conferences and where, they certainly have their value, but here's where I felt that I could really put my ear to the ground and and really, I think the highlight of the conferences, I mean, you guys were all great speakers. I mean, nothing personal here, but I think the real value of this was just all the interactions, all the chance conversations. And to me, it was just invaluable. And so Juan, I really appreciated that you told me about this. And now that I know, it's like, I don't think you guys are going to be rid of me.
Perfect.
Excellent. We'll look forward to next year.
Definitely.
I mean, hopefully see you also in
Yes.
between
Before
that.
then.
Christmas comes once a year.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, it was a pleasant surprise to get the message from you that you were showing up to the event. So that was awesome, Tony. You're one of these hidden gems in the industry where I feel like talking to you, you just have this wealth of knowledge that I don't think anyone else here has. Just because you pay attention to a lot of really cool stuff. Well, so what were some of the? You said you were keeping your ear to the ground on stuff. Like, what were some of the things that
Yeah.
you were hearing?
Yeah, well, I'll first sum it up in one word, which was it was really all about context, and basically it's the context of data. And I think a key issue of this, and I'm just thinking about this back from the big data years, is that at that time it's like we felt so liberated that now we could get all this data. And it was like the more data, the better. We weren't thinking about what data and or anything like that. We just got caught up in the euphoria, just like today we're getting caught up in the euphoria over AI. Eventually, we started to worry about data lakes becoming data swamps. But anyway, fast forward to the present. There's certain perennial issues we've always had about data quality, basically governance, security, and all that type of thing. But I think as we start, throwing AI into the mix in terms of consuming data for AI, and I'm talking about both structured, and unstructured data, is that we have to worry about just not just what is this data, but who's using it, how, what, and why. We need to know the 5 Ws of data. And so a number of the talks, and each of you three are guilty in this regard, but guilty in a good way, is that your sessions really, really reinforce that theme. I mean, it started off, with Ole, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but since we're getting south of the border, we'll just say Ole for the moment. But Ole's keynote on what he was calling the metagrid. And what he was talking about was essentially that concerns that we don't know about the 5 Ws of the data. And very often, the data is very often functionally defined by where it's sitting. Is it sitting in an app? Is it sitting, where it basically is really about the business logic, or is it in a database? We're talking about schema, or is it in cloud infrastructure, which is how we, how we can, compute the data and how we consume it. There's all this, and it's missing. And also, where is this data flowing? And so, I thought his idea, with the metagrid, was really spot on in terms of, he wasn't talking about technology. It's like, we need to know where this data is moving. You did some great posts on LinkedIn where you really expanded on that. So I'm not going to steal your thunder there, but I'll also then blame you on basically for essentially reinforcing it in your presentation, which was really all about knowledge and semantics. And that, basically, we really need to understand the meaning of this data. Then was Andrew Nguyen's basic presentation about context engineering. This was in the context of, I hate to use the same word twice, tautology here, for working basically here in RAG applications, using language models for both structured and unstructured data. So I just saw this, and again, I'll just kind of wrap up and not take up the whole hour here, but Matt and Joe, your data town hall also reinforced that. And as part of all this, what I saw was that really have, we worry about AI taking jobs away. The fact is that AI doesn't know the context of data. And that we really need to, there's a desperate crying need for knowledge engineers. And actually, let's take this back into history. And this is something which Ole kind of referred to. This is a type of skill that we look for, in with reference librarians, which is that you went to a library, you'd have a card catalog that told you what the Dewey Decimal number was. The author just gave, but it would be the reference librarian who you could go to and say, by the way, is this something which is basically pertinent to the question I'm trying to answer? And so I'll kind of, wrap this part up on this part, which is that, are we really looking at reference librarians, but now being known as knowledge engineers, becoming cool again?
Yes. That's my immediate reaction.
Juan's been waiting his entire life for somebody to say this.
As have all the library scientists.
Joe, that is a fact. I have been, and I say this, this needs to happen for me personally, because otherwise I will say that I spent the last 20 years of my life and I've thrown it down the drain. And I'm not going to let that happen, because this is literally what I have been focused on for my entire career. I believe this in my gut, in my mind, in my soul. We need to do this. And kind of just to react to Tony, that I call this, Tim Gasper and I talked about this a while ago. It's like, we've lived in a data first world. Give me more data. Give me more. I need more data. I need more. And I'm like, hold on. So you're telling me you can't solve the problem yet because you lack data. So you want more data and you're going to solve the problem? No, that's not going to happen. So something needs to change. And this is like, you're reinventing the wheel, right? Insanity, all those types of cliches that we say. Like, the paradigm shift needs to be what I call a knowledge first world. Obviously, data is part of that, but it's the knowledge first world where you have people first, context first, relationships first. And I think this is the shift that we're starting to go realize. And I'm happy that it's not just me saying this anymore. There's more people saying it too. So I'm glad that this conversation started with Tony saying the word context.
And library too, right? I think
yes,
this is another, I guess, underrepresented group in the data world, right? Where there's a knowledge, especially the knowledge graph community, I think that Juan is one of the ringleaders in. And then you have I think adjacent to it for sure, the library sciences and information sciences group. And this is represented by people like Housley and Jess Talisman, Jenna Jordan, all of whom have graduate plus degrees in library sciences, right? But this is like a very underrepresented group. I mean, it's, the larger field of data, right? It's only recently that that even library science is on my radar. I mean, I've gone to libraries. I used to practically live in one as a child. but it's not like I know the first thing about the science of libraries. I know about getting late fees and stealing books. So, but it's cool to see these fields starting to intersect. Just Talisman's working on a book with me right now. Other library sciences people will be doing that soon. But it's reading these books. It's opened my eyes to just this broader possibility of data, and reference data, and all this other stuff that, as a data person, you'd think I would know, but I'm an absolute dolt at this kind of stuff. This is what we're trained to do. We're trained to do everything except, I suppose, what they do. And so it's cool seeing all these worlds intersect, I think. And Day-to-Day Texas was, I think, a chance for these worlds to intersect in a way where you could listen to talks, obviously, but also get drinks and talk to people about their passions and so forth. And that was a really rare opportunity, because most conferences, again, are very monolithic and very myopically focused on either a vendor and its agenda or certain topics. But Day-to-Day seemed to be much more of a kind of a hippie drum circle in that regard, where you're just bringing a lot of the other people to the mix, and it's awesome to see.
And Tony, I love the callback to big data, because I mean, at some point, big data went out of style, and basically what happened is it stopped being novel. Like, you could just get Snowflake would do big data, any system would. And I consider the Gen AI craze the rebirth of big data. Because how did big data start? Like Google scraping the entire internet so they could deliver a good search product. And now we're back to scraping the entire internet to build these LLMs, but they're LLMs that have no context.
Right.
Why do they hallucinate? Well, many reasons, but partially because, they scrape conspiracy theory sites, and they scrape everything, and nothing has any context, and nothing is verified, which is the whole point of library sciences and knowledge graphs and such, to actually find out what is true before trying to build an answer to something. And of course we have RAG, but it's very early with RAG. Like, we're still developing that. And that's where there are all these opportunities to have an impact.
Well, what's really interesting is, like, with all the hysteria over DeepSeek this week, as if everybody's shocked that we could basically get great results or good enough results. I don't want to call them great, that may be an exaggeration, but get good enough results from a model that basically has just a fraction of the compute power. It could even be maybe even run on CPUs. We don't know what they were running them on. There's a lot of black box here about DeepSeek at the moment, so we need to take a little bit of a let's say a trust but verify view here. But the fact is that what they've been working at is nothing different from what I'm seeing Databricks or IBM's or the world, which is looking at smaller models. But in all that, and getting smaller models and getting to the point of just having just enough data to get good enough results, basically knowing what data we have in there and whether it's the right data becomes even more important.
I loved one of the most ironic internet moments of the week, too, when Sam Altman was whining that they had trained the model by scraping ChatGPT and said, "This is horrible. They're stealing from us. They're violating terms of service." It's like, Sam, did you talk to your attorneys? Because as I recall, you're being sued by several organizations for scraping their data.
But this is different because it violates their terms of service.
That's right.
So obviously, don't do it. I think this will be very interesting to see how it plays out, especially in courts, because it's like, cool, Chinese companies steals Americans stuff. I don't know. That happens. I don't know. It's been happening for decades. Like legally, that's kind of how that works in China. But this is not part of the export control thing. Well, not part of like doing business in China where you have to turn over all your trade secrets to them. It's just like just a company, I think, being pretty savvy at what they do and giving OpenAI, I think, a run for its money in terms of I don't know. I'm not going to use the word shady, but I'll use the word promiscuously scraping. Yeah, those are two words actually. But whatever. I don't know. Those are my words. Sue me.
So, Joe, what was your takeaway?
Takeaway.
Conference.
I think it's interesting. I feel like there's been, a lot of discussions were kind of same as ever. Like, let's, do things better with data. I thought what was really interesting were the talks that resonated that, I think we're kind of on the bit of the newer front. Like, people were raving about Ole's talk on Metagrid. I think that was an interesting dissection of potentially future architectures. Although he says it already exists, we just haven't put a name to it yet. So it's sort of, I guess, recognizing a planet you just discovered that's always been there. But then, Ava Maya's talk got a lot of positive reviews as well, and that was more about the skills we need in organizations as AI automation happens and so forth. So I thought that was interesting because the soft skills talks, I think, are sort of a mixed bag. Like, some of them are so tautologically obvious that, it as a talk, it sort of runs the risk of, I think, going either really well or kind of falling flat, but I think she did a really good job with that. Whereas what I mean by there's some soft skills talks like you need to be nice to people, and it's like, yeah, no shit, thank you, I knew that, but just because you told me that, I'm gonna be really mean to you now. So just I thought it was an interesting mix of talks where. And the other part was the discussion things on Sunday. So typically, day-to-day Texas, it's only a Saturday event, and then everyone sort of disperses on Sunday. Most people go home. People like me leave later, and we're just kind of stuck wandering around Austin, like just aimlessly, which is also kind of fun. But I think Lynn understood that the way the day-to-day is set up, there's so many good talks piled on top of each other that it's almost impossible to attend all of them. And really, the real power of it is the talking outside of the talks as well, like the networking that I think all of us are alluding to. And that's the real power of it. So I think he felt like, let's do the discussions on Sunday. I was like, that sounds like an awesome idea. Let's totally do that. And I think that was definitely an interesting one where I'm curious to see how that evolves going forward. I didn't do any talks per se this year. I don't know. I more just facilitate other people talking. I guess it's become the new job. But I thought the discussions were really interesting. Like Jean-Georges Perrin gave kind of this discussion on data products and tried to define it. And I think the only thing I came away with was that it was really difficult to define data products with a lot of top experts in the room. So it became that was interesting to see. But yeah, I think more than anything, I think it's the discussions outside of the talks that I think are really, really valuable, right? Like sitting there, drinking a beer with Tony and talking about whatever the hell we're talking about, a lot of things, right? And so those are the gems to me, right? Like that's really what I go there for. The talks are great, and I think people, give the talks, and that's certainly great. But I just go there to hang out with friends. That's really the agenda. And
yeah. One of the things which really surprised me, maybe it doesn't surprise me, is I saw very little, talk about data mesh. There was exactly one session, but I think I think it's more significant is I think the one real, the real one lasting concept that came out of data mesh was data product, because I think with data mesh we were tackling a federated governance problem that really was a bit overly ambitious, but data product, well, Joe, up until you basically just said it was hard for experts to define. It seemed like an idea that made sense to kind of gather around to treat basically not just the entity of data, but like how you put it together, how you govern it. And basically you're essentially providing this data to data consumers. So it was interesting that basically that data product was certainly on the agenda, but that more interestingly enough, and I'm sorry, I regret that I missed that session, but that even the best minds in the world, in the data world, couldn't come to any consensus on that.
Well, I think on this side, it's already a fact of life. I think that the whole data mesh had its hype, and it's kind of the term, and people don't even talk about it anymore. The data product, treating data as a product, all that stuff is the most valuable stuff that's come out of that. And I mean, honestly, I think if you see the blog that Jean-Georges wrote, I mean, I think there is a definitions out there, and I think it's fine. We can make it simpler, but I think it was a great exercise, and it distilled it down into some really nice, took everything we discussed and put it into 5 sentences. I gave him my version of the 1 sentence, and I'm looking it up right now, but yeah, I think it was all in the right direction, and at the end it's back to the spirit of community, and it was a very spirited conversation because there are people who agreed and disagreed around some things, and those are the discussions that we need to have. Matt, what were your main takeaways? I'm now curious too.
So there were a couple of things. So I love the talk on the metagrid, although to me, and we were kind of talking about this over dinner one, it did seem like what he originally defined in his enterprise data catalog book is very similar to the metagrid, but he's changing terms because the term catalog has already been claimed, basically. And what he sees inside organizations is that routinely they'll have 5 catalogs. And his vision is to have like everything put together, even if you have to kind of combine multiple catalogs to do that. So that was interesting. I'm very curious. Joe, you've started reading his book that hasn't officially come out yet, right? And I'm looking forward to reading it and kind of getting the rest of his thoughts beyond what was in the talk. The other thing that really jumped out to me is just the existential sense of the conference. And I especially got this from our town hall, but it came through elsewhere, which is like a lot of questioning of our roles and the future. And in the past, I would say that the town hall tended to split between more junior, cloud native data practitioners who call themselves data engineers, and then maybe more senior people who call themselves DBAs or ETL developers. And there'd be a bit of a battle royale between those two camps. And this year, it tended to be the AI optimists versus the AI doomers, and then some people in between. So that was my main
I think that's at least a trend I see.
Yeah,
everywhere right now. Like any discussions is like, am I still going to have a job? And is the world, are we positive? I mean, are there optimists? Or I think it's just the nature of the discussion in the world today.
Right.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's in the backdrop of, like, I think a lot of just general turbulence in the world too,
Sure.
like everything. So people are like, oh, great, this on top of all the other stuff, cool. I'm like a robot, I might just take my job, and I don't know how I'm gonna like pay my bills or eat. Like, that's the trepidation, right? I mean, it's real.
Well, but let's have some hope here. You're a reference librarian.
So hottest job is the sexy job of the 21st century is reference.
Well, I kind of the takeaways I had, and I was thinking about it of how I would visualize this. I think at the center, so three things kind of in the satellite. So obviously AI, and then I think graphs is always a big topic because there's a whole community that get together here on graphs, and then there's a bunch of stuff around strategy. Right there, I mean, there talks about kind of the skills. There's the data panel. There was a panel about data education, which I really liked. Right, so then kind of those three things. But what united all three of them was this conversation about the context, the metadata, the semantics came at the center. So that's all. So if I were to summarize, context, semantics, metadata was at the center, kind of a takeaway, and the AI would bring that in, the strategy would bring that in, kind of and also the graphs would bring that in. So that's kind of how I it all structured in there. And then, I mean, the keynote was about metadata, right? That's one aspect. But then also, I think it's also kind of a description of the times that we're in. As you mentioned, Tony, it's like, context is something really important. And then another thing that Joe, that you just mentioned on the library sciences, I think this is, if we're starting to go spend more time talking about metadata, naturally we're going to have to start talking to the librarians, because guess what? That metadata is their lives, right? And it's something that has been since the beginning of almost civilization, right? I mean, the friggin' Rosetta Stone, in a way, is kind of your first semantic layer, first metadata. I was saying that word is this word, this language is that language, and so forth. And this, I'll say, when history gets written down, there's like there is your book. That's a fundamental piece of history that's going to go down when it comes to data engineering. And I think seeing kind of even the work that Ole is doing, which brings in the library sciences community, I think that's going to be an important inflection. So when we write history on these moments, right, this is kind of, we'll see the very important people and the kind of the events that occurred, the books that were written. And I think this is one of those situations that I'm really looking forward to how this is going to evolve. Another person I want to call out, shout out to Amalia Child. Like, she was also at the conference, and she wrote this blog post a couple months ago around kind of the laws of library science and how it applies. And that, for me, that was super transformational for me personally, and how I've been involved in the work and my thinking about that. But I'm super excited to spend more time with library sciences folks.
Yes.
More.
Can I ask a question to you folks? As a newbie to day-to-day Texas, how would you say that the agenda has changed over the last few years? And that is this talk about context and the importance of people that have the types of skills of, say, a library. Is this different from what you've been hearing the last few years, or is this kind of a continuation of a trend that you saw going?
I think it's evolved, but one would have more context, no pun intended. But
I think it's been like this, and then it's gone up.
Yeah. The rise of AI, I think, is when a lot of these discussions started happening for a lot of reasons. I think that these discussions are more poignant than these, because I mean, the word ontology, for example, like that wasn't even like a word that data people would ever use. It was like on a what? Like, that's cool, right? But now it's commonplace. And I mean, I think I had like 2 discussions today alone about people with ontologies with people, and so that should give you an idea. But yeah, the discussions, I mean, so like the first year I went was, what was that, 2023, I think. And that was, I think Zhamak was giving the keynote there. And that was a time when it was all, data mesh, data engineering. Like, she was giving the opening keynote. Matt and I were supposed to give the closing keynote. And that's actually where the town hall came up, because Lynn, in his infinite wisdom, just giving him shit, but he like had the open bar outside of our scheduled talk, and I was like, dude, nobody's gonna show up. They're all gonna be out there getting drunk. And I was like, Matt, wouldn't it be funny if we just brought everybody in and just like actually reversed the conference and then just asked a bunch of drunk people questions? And that was the birth of the town hall. But we literally had our slides ready to go give a talk because we're like, we have no idea how this is gonna go. So that was like one of the evolutions of it. But the conversation point was really just data. I mean, it's day-to-day Texas, right? I didn't see many discussions on graphs, library sciences, maybe because it wasn't a topic that really would have interested me back then anyway. It was just all the data talks. But fast forward, you started seeing a bit more of it, I think, last year. Then, as Juan said, it sort of just went to the perpendicular, basically. So that's kind of how that went. But yeah, this year was, I think, a lot different than the others in that way. So
what's interesting that you can find the schedules from 2022, 2023.
Yeah.
If you see them right now,
we go check.
Well, and I should point out that the conference was renamed starting last year. So it used to be just Data Day Texas, and then it turned into Data Plus AI Day, which might seem like just hopping on the latest trends, but it turns out that combining these two audiences, like the traditional core data audience with the generative AI kind of new generation, has played out extremely well. I think that's where you're getting these conversations about contextualizing data and contextualizing generated answers and combining, data quality with RAG with generative AI to build useful products.
Right. What I would wonder basically is that I would presume that traditionally the dialogue at Data Day Texas, before it became Data and AI Day Texas, or whatever, was probably on structured data. And I'm wondering if basically with generative AI that we're starting to look at bringing unstructured data, just like big data brought in variably structured data back in the past. So we're going through these different, sort of expansions of the data envelope. I wonder if the fact that now we're looking at at unstructured data, well, all data has some sort of structure, but what we'll call unstructured data is what's brought basically context and dare I say library science, to make it cool again, make it new again.
Well, actually, this posted. How many topics were about unstructured text type of stuff at this conference? There are only a handful of things. I think.
Yeah. Right? I was surprised. I was really surprised about
that. This is a trend that I see when I speak to data people and we talk about AI, and I'm like, wait a minute, a lot of this AI and the Gen AI, all this stuff we're doing is really on text, and how much of your structured data stuff you're putting into that. So I think there is still a gap that is needed to start combining all the generative AI with the structured data and the unstructured. By unstructured, I'm talking text mainly, but then we should also talk about audio and video, which is also things that we're far away from, right? So I think that's still an open conversation. Now, I think the reason why context comes in is when it comes to generative AI, I think we've been pushing this work of knowledge graphs. I think people, everybody else, the entire world is now realizing, if I want to improve my hallucination, if I want to get more accurate, reduce my hallucination, improve the accuracy, all that stuff, you need to have that context. And I think that the knowledge graph is what is actually driving that. Knowledge graph gets connected to metadata. And I think that's kind of been how I'm perceiving the evolution of these conversations that we've had in the last 2 years.
What's interesting? Go ahead.
Interestingly, sorry, Tony, you're
earthquake here in Jersey.
Happens. Interestingly, one of the conversations on unstructured data, text data, was from Bill Inman, who is one of the godfathers of structured data.
And he's been talking about this for years now.
Dude, he started working on this, I believe, in the late 90s, early 2000s is when he started working on text data. Funny enough, when he came up with the data warehouse, he told me he sort of like mentally just left it behind a few years after, because he's like, he got kind of bored. He's like, because he realized, okay, even in most businesses, what accounts for volume-wise most of the data? It's not structured data. It's text data. That's just back in the day. Now you have images and all this other stuff. So dude was way ahead of his time. But that was, one of the only talks I saw that talked about unstructured data, really. The rest of it was, what was it? They had relational AI, which was more about graph. And then the speaker had I don't know, he was speaker's kind of throwing shade at knowledge graph people. So it was kind of fun to watch that. But apart from that, I didn't see much in the way of non-tabular types of data discussions, if there were discussions of that at all, right? Again, the data products was kind of the big one. Johan Benoit and Claire also gave a talk on data products towards the end of the day, and that was fantastic. But as far as data types go, back to your point, it was not as skewed as I thought it would be. maybe next year. We'll see.
Well, actually, what I'm wondering is basically who are the people, who are the skill sets that would know about unstructured data? In that traditionally, when we think of data professionals, we define them, in the context of structured data. But now that with generative coming in, that it really brings in this whole, whether it be text or let's make my brain hurt here with basically audio, video, or even let's say like molecular data or whatever. I mean, it's just limited by the imagination. That we need to bring in that we have to bring in a new type of professional that does a new skill set. I'm going to throw that back to your folks, or should this be basically within the wheelhouse of people who are already data engineers and data scientists?
I think it's too much to expect the data engineers to do this stuff. I mean, they're already so much weight. I mean, actually, I would think of the data engineers. That's why we need all this knowledge stuff that I'm talking about. Like they're already kind of expected to go do this, and they don't even have time to go do all this stuff. So even that's already a problem. And I think we need to start really thinking about this holistically from a strategy perspective within organizations. This reminds me when I was at the MLOps conference with Joe, and I'm like, I've never been there, and I walked in there, and I'm like, damn, like there's this other world that I have no idea about, which I've been aware that it exists, but I have never kind of got into it. And I say foo, you say bar, we say words with the same thing, right? So it's like we do transforms, well, they do features, right? And there's tools, right? We call it governance and they call it guardrails, right? They have catalogs and search, like they're doing the same thing, but in a different way, but conceptually it's the same. Like, then should we expect that we should have one team and one set of tools that does everything? I mean, you can say yes, but I can also make the argument like that's just creating monoliths and boiling the ocean for that stuff. At the end of the day, I think it's really going to depend on kind of the use cases, what organizations are having.
Yeah.
Because everybody says, oh, there's so much text. And like, yeah, it's true. 80% of the stuff is text, right? Everything's 80%, right? 80% is text and 20% is data. Therefore, because it's more quantity, there should be more value. I call bullshit on that. First of all, right? Depends on. So, but then some places may have a lot of more text and there's going to be more value in that than their structured data. And the other places are going to have a lot more structured data than a lot of people are going to have more unstructured, but their value is going to be in the smaller structured. And it's going to depend on the use case you're going to go have. If you're just you're doing your analytics, like what are you going to go do with bringing in your text? Like that's not what you need to go do. I mean, again, all goes back to what is the problem you're solving.
That's exactly it. Like I kind of sit in the intersection of the ML world and the data world. So I think it's been kind of equally at both types of conferences. And it's interesting. There's a lot of overlap, but I would say, as you point out, definitely overlap to the degree where I could interchangeably put data or ML and you would get the same result. But that's like the emphasis of my upcoming book, Mixed Model Arts, is really about how do you deal with all these different types of data across different use cases. And you're absolutely right. It's like, just because you have a lot of text doesn't mean there's a lot of signal in it. You just might be sending a lot of emails. That's also happening. Or, in the case of like one of my friends, they run a company called Coactive, right? And so they do search on unstructured images and I think video, but not labeled, right? It's an insanely difficult problem to solve. So but that's super useful if you're doing with like a lot of image data that you don't want to pre-tag, pre-label, right? So it's just different use cases. But I think nowadays, though, being aware at least of all the different approaches, what I do foresee happening in the next few years, probably 3 to 10 or whatever made up number I just have, but like the role of software, data, and ML is going to converge. You can already see it happening. The number of software engineers I know who are interested in AI, all of them, same with data people, and to a lesser degree, software engineers and analytics people or machine learning people are interested in analytics. So a lot of these, you're just seeing a morph of a lot of stuff. And then out of left field comes library sciences and knowledge and all this other stuff. And it's just like, but I think more than anything, you're going to see sort of a polyglot expertise starting to emerge that just didn't exist because, you tell me a software application these days, it's not going to, in the next 5 years, it's not going to include AI agents. That's not going to include, some sort of machine learning workflow and embedded analytics and the whole 9 yards. Like all this stuff is getting integrated.
Yeah. I was having a long conversation with SAP about that earlier today, but just getting back to your point, Juan, I agree with you. And I don't think there's going to be any sort of monolithic tool that can handle it all. But that being said, when we look at AI governance and data governance, these are basically two sides of the same coin, which is are we answer? Are we asking the right question? Are we asking the right questions with the right data? And ultimately, the answer is that we need to know which version of which model was on which version of which data set, which means that even though we need different tools to track the lineage of all this stuff, we need some way to bring this together. And even though maybe it may not be united in a single persona, we just somehow make the different people that are involved in different parts of like the AI ops lifecycle and the data ops lifecycle, the point where they're essentially getting on the same page. And I think this is part of what Oli was talking about with the metagrid, which is essentially we need to know where the metadata is flowing, so we can get an idea in terms of how data is being consumed and why and how.
And that's what I wrote in my LinkedIn post today. Is like kind of my takeaways of kind of the metagrid, because I've been talking to him for a long time about this stuff, and I'm happy to say this publicly because we've talked about this. Like, it started out so abstract. Like, what the fuck are you talking about, man? Like, bring it down. Like, I've had so much fun freaking conversations around it, and like, or what are you being secret? Anyways, Will and I are really great friends. But what I love about kind of going back and forth around this stuff is that, like, I've been able to kind of like realize kind of the things of sometimes it's so simple that it's complicated situation, right? And I think this is one of them. But kind of boiling it down is like, we don't even have a freaking map, the Google map of all the systems we have in our organization, right? That's it. And all we want to go do is create that map. And when he says like it's there, it's like, yeah, the freaking roads are there. You know how to get there. Like, people have gone there. Like, you're not making anything new. All we're doing is documenting that whole place that already exists. Now later on, you can say we can do this better, and then but you can start making those conversations or decisions because you already have a map. And I think that's the situation. And people say, well, why do you need to go do this? So my organization has been working great without it, which is a very valid point. Like, why should I go do all this stuff? It's like, yeah, that's fine. But I mean, I think for the economical argument is that you don't know how much money you've been leaving on the table. And you may be working fine, but I think other people will start realizing, oh, I can do things better with this. And that's how competition gets ahead of you, or how smaller teams start to be more efficient and so forth. So I think that's kind of the situation that we're in right now. And again, somebody I posted is like, but how is this something new? I'm like, it's not new. It's like, I mean, the roads existed. People knew how to get there. It's like there was no map. And I think that's the whole point. You want to be able to go share this knowledge because it makes it easier to understand. New people onboarding, like if something breaks, I want to figure out how else is going to go affect other systems, because right now it just takes so much time to do that.
I think another thing we need to talk about is that a lot of these data practices that we've been working for on decades and slowly progressing on, hopefully, like context, like data quality, like things such as DevOps and ML ops, we're now going through a big reset on a lot of these where we kind of have to start over with Gen AI. So one of the examples I like to use is that in a software product, anytime I integrate a library or an API, it should be versioned, and I should be able to lock to a specific version until I'm ready to advance to the next version. Well, I mean, OpenAI all the time does silent releases, like practically every day, which means that your very carefully engineered prompt that's working today may suddenly stop working tomorrow, and you will have no control over that. And so we're kind of in the Wild West on a lot of this stuff. And that's where I think, to your point, Juan, like, we need to keep harping on the fundamentals. Like, hey, we need to get back to these fundamentals, like controlled releases and data quality and context. Like, all these really basic things are really, really important, actually, especially in the context of new technology.
Look, and I got to tell you, like, how do we know we're at the hype, right?
Right.
So things, we're going to start going down when people start putting this out, testing it, and put it into production, and it works and it starts failing because I think one of the reasons I predict is because of the testing, right? And we've entered an era of doing software testing that is non-deterministic, and guess what? Nobody knows how to go do this stuff. And what are we going to go do? Which we've done this at our organization, is we're going to put the same type of, the way we do testing today, we're going to apply it to that. That should be the first thing we go test. And guess what? It's going to work for some parts, and it's not going to work for other parts. And we're going to evolve. Like, this is really cool. Like, I want to go see how people are doing testing because I know they're not.
Agree. Yeah.
All I can say from, I think if I'm generative AI and doing basically document summarization on what you were just saying, I'll just, I'll just summarize as like what's old is new.
And that one, yeah, the summarization. But I think there's going to be but there's going to be applications where we're pushing new things because of this.
Right.
And
But
that
the
is
skills, the disciplines that you're talking about, it's like we have to apply the disciplines that we've supposed to be developing, or I should say, cultivating all these years to these new challenges.
which a discipline here is: are you testing your software? Right. That's a fundamental, and there's fundamentals that will survive the test, and then you'll apply that. But then what's going to what's switching a little bit is, well, that exact tech. So what regression testing, right? We're going to do this stuff, right? Unit testing, like what does unit testing for LLMs mean?
Damn good question.
I run this with this prompt, I get an answer back, right? Is the unit I'm expecting always that same answer? No. So, but it's still, I get a different answer, but it's still correct. So how does that work? This is fun times.
Yeah, it's kind of like black box, and all of a sudden we're back to basically going to empirical testing.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. Yeah, I mean, this is what scientists, physicists, chemists, neurologists have had to deal with forever, right? Like testing in those fields, experiments are not deterministic. You can go ask the physicists working at CERN if their experiments are deterministic. They're not. They're statistical, and we need to adapt that same mindset in software. Really, we've needed to do it for a long time, but now we're forced to do it.
Bingo. Just reminds me of my in grad school taking a randomized algorithms course, right? And then learning how to do correctness of these things. How do you determine the correctness of a randomized algorithms? So these stuff isn't there, but it's just, I mean, the theory is there, and other areas of sciences do this. It's just, I think it's we're gonna have to kind of get out of our bubble. This is the time where bridge builders are going to shine.
Absolutely, yeah.
I like that.
And I think that was the main takeaway for me from the conference too, was just the intersection of different schools of thought and different approaches that I think up to now had been traditionally siloed for whatever reasons. I don't know why, but people are finally coming together, and that I think that's pretty cool. Will there be disagreements? Absolutely. I think part of it is just understanding each other's language and figuring out, each other's disciplines, and that's going to take time. Data people don't. I mean, I'm trying to understand library sciences right now. I don't know that much, yeah. Right? I mean, I started reading The Accidental Taxonomist and all these other books, and like I rocked away like, cool. I sort of know something, but not really, right? And there's a lot to know. I mean, library sciences, that's a graduate degree.
Gosh, yes.
I don't even think they offer it for undergrads.
Look, again, and without talking about what's old is new here, the fact is we've been talking about multifunction teams for a long time. But what we've been talking about up to now is bringing business and IT together. And Joe, what you're saying, and Juan, what you're saying is like, oh my God, this is expanding even beyond that in terms of the range of disciplines that we need to bring together. Same old problem, but much more complicated on this go around.
More complicated.
Yeah.
Kind of closing out. What are you guys looking forward to this year and next year?
Well, since I can't see anybody and nobody's talked, I'll jump in here since I am literally flying blind here. I love being on radio. But, as I mentioned, you asked me at dinner what I was saying. And I'm basically saying that we're of necessity going into a renaissance for data, which is that we need to basically get serious about what we should always have been serious about all these years. But guess what? When you mess up, let's say you're doing business intelligence. Okay, you can screw up a report. Okay, there might be some misinterpretation, but when you start, messing around with generative AI and getting into content, you can really mess up. And so I think it's going to bring a much greater consciousness. It's not going to bring a whole mess, round of like Cambridge explosion of new tool. It's going to mean that data is going to get respect again, along with library scientists.
Juan or Matt?
Okay, I was going to say, I'm looking forward to this year to positive, pleasant surprises. So there's lots of turmoil in the world. Unfortunately, we'll probably see some negative surprises. But I think in the latest hype cycle of Gen AI, we kind of got into this hockey stick curve mentality of growing costs, like more and more data, more and more costs, more and more money being spent. And, the whole fallout from DeepSeek, it's still pretty early to know what's going to come out of that. But at least it's a sign that like maybe we're finally starting to break out of that cycle into something a bit more sane, where the new generation tools can be run with less energy and less money. And we'll see where that goes. I think there may be a lot of interesting evolution in the space in 2025. Again, like you were saying, Tony, a lot of that is going to revolve around data. Like, how do we improve training data? How do we synthetically generate training data? How do we find facts within data? How do we verify data? Like, all these really basic things, old things, are going to become very, very important.
Well, on what you just said, Matt, a book I recommend everybody who's kind of worried about the situations right now, but I agree, there's so much turmoil. The Rational Optimist by Riley. That's a book that I recently read.
Rational Optimist. I will find it.
Matt Ridley. Yeah.
Yeah, that book has made me feel much better about
Duly noted.
And then I wrote a New Year's letter, and I wrote. I'm just going to read a little bit I had here. It said, "Many of my conversations with folks have inspired me to lean in something I deeply believe, and is aligned with my passion: the need for organizations to invest in semantics and knowledge." Hence my talk at Day-to-Day Texas. I'm more convinced than ever that this is the moment to make an impact. With the rise of generative AI, we have a small but critical window to influence the broader data community and its leaders to prioritize semantics and knowledge. For too long, we've complained about today having the same problems we faced over 30 years ago. It's time for a change, and I believe investing in semantics and knowledge is a critical key to address these longstanding challenges. Generative AI will help reduce the cost of that investment, your input. So I think that's kind of where I'm pushing. Context at the center, as we started off here with Tony. I think that's already a sign. And I think people just need more give me some, how do I start? I want to start around this stuff. And yeah, I think hearing the word ontology more and more. I mean, last year it wasn't even a word. I mean, 2 years ago,
Wow.
they don't use the O word and stuff. And now people are starting to go say more and more. So I think that's a great sign. But we got a critical window. How about you, Joe?
I think all the above. There's a lot going on right now. Obviously, I'm going to be quite busy this year with my own projects, as we all are, of course. I'm not going to talk about that, but I don't know. I think the DeepSeek thing is interesting in the sense where I think we'll either see more quote efficient models being used, but I'm not sure yet. I mean, I remember I was talking at the Friday party with somebody who's working on Stargate, and that was interesting in the sense where, this person was trying to describe the amount of energy needed to power AI. And I was just sitting there like, the human brain uses like 20 watts of power. So I'm wondering like what the discrepancy is between these things. And I turned to my friend, she's a mathematician and knows a lot about AI. And I was like, do we have the math wrong on this? Like, could we dedicate at least some of this funding to like figuring out how to make this more efficient than anything? But then I also realized with $500 billion staring in the face, you have no incentive to make anything efficient. So that's just reality. So I'm curious to see like where this goes. Because I mean, we do have an energy problem, climate problem, and a lot of other issues. So I'm curious to see like what gets solved this year. And is this a year of AGI? Whatever goalpost you're using to determine what that is, that's fascinating. But even if these models get approximately close to something that isn't AGI but insanely useful, I think that's pretty interesting. And then of course I'm just waiting to see what happens with agents. I know that because this year is supposed to be the year of agents, so. Not Asians, agents. I thought I said that. So, I'm Asian, so I can say that. But it will be interesting because I think that because it's the things that I've noticed over the past couple of years since ChatGPT came out was every year is the year of X with AI, right? And not the social network, but the broad placeholder variable. And so I'm curious to see like how this all shakes out. Because as far as I can tell, enterprise agentic AI is not really a thing. You don't have the security in place yet to do these things. And so, but it's being forced on you by every vendor. Like this is going to replace software applications and everything else. Oh, so you got an alarm going. Anyway, that's what I'm excited about. But it's more of a curiosity thing. I don't know if it's a level of excitement, more just like, let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Pretty deadpan about a lot of things. So.
Yeah, last year at Day-to-Day Texas, we were all talking about multimodal models. You remember this? And it was all about
that was a big
video
one, right?
and audio. I don't hear too much about that anymore. I mean, it's around, but like that is not, it's all agentic now.
Well, I think it's one thing at a time, and so at this point, I think agentic has probably distracted us off of multimodal. Also, the fact is, this huge carbon footprint of computing all these models has gotten us onto, looking at how can we start applying value engineering here.
Yeah.
So it's all going to come back, but I think we got a few other things to deal with first.
A lot of things.
A few.
Well, awesome. Let's all try and connect before the next event next year. And then I guess we'll all see each other at Data Day Texas. Thank you.
Let's do this again in a year.
We will, absolutely.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.